All right, we'll get started with the presentation today. My name is Paroma Nandi. I'm with the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, and on the line here is Katie Yorick and Deandra Pollard, and they will be also presenting some of the information for today's session. So just a quick overview of the agenda. We'll be discussing the CEFA overview, eligibility, projects, the review and selection, and then there's also some time for Q&A at the end of this presentation. And just some housekeeping for today's webinar. It's being recorded and will be posted, both the webinar and slides will be posted to the MOHS website later today. We also will be having a FAQ document on the website as well with the competition information as we get questions in with today's webinar and then through the HSP applications inbox. All attendees here are muted to prevent any background noise. And then again, as I mentioned, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the session, but feel free to enter your questions in as you think of them. And then only questions about the competition process and application will be answered during the webinar. If you have specific questions about a project proposal, please send it directly to the HSP applications at baltimorecity.gov inbox. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Deandra.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Deandra Pollard with the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. So we have the CEFA overview, Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, continuum of care, our funding sources, then some general facts, and our timeline. MOHS is a direct recipient of federal, state, and local funding. Through the CEFA RFP process, MOHS selects qualified projects to provide services to individuals and families who are, 1, currently experiencing homelessness, 2, at risk of homelessness, and or 3, living with HIV or AIDS. Selected projects are sub-granted funds through one or more of the funding sources available through the CFA. The journey home. Funding decisions under the CFA are done in collaboration with the Baltimore City's continuum of care. Projects are aligned with COC practices and the city's action plan on ending homelessness. These are our list of our 5 funding sources. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Emergency Solutions Grant, $1,905,804 is our anticipated funding for that. The State of Maryland Homelessness Solutions Program, and we have the $2.111 and $500, of course, for the anticipated funding. The State of Maryland Homelessness Solutions Program and Youth for Youth, $150,000, and then of course HUD, our housing opportunities for persons with HIV/AIDS, or what they call our HOPWA program, $8,275,283 anticipated funding for that grant, and then our Maryland Department of Health grant, state special funds, of course, is $690,249. Our funding priorities, where reduce the length of time people experience homelessness, times in shelters, your transitional housing, and their time spent on the street. Increase exits to permanent housing. We also want to reduce returns to homelessness. Our action plan. Project outcomes are focused on connecting participants to permanent and affordable housing. Projects will need to use the coordinated entry and or coordinated access system to refer and match participants to services and housing. Projects will provide comprehensive services and discharge planning to reduce returns to shelter. Support services are available to all participants that may be interested that include connections to employment and economic opportunity. Lastly, we want to address racial inequities within the homeless service system, and specifically will work to advance racial equity within those programs. This is our timeline. Of course, the release of the FRP was February 3rd. The application deadline, of course, is March 14th by 4 p.m. And then the conditional award notifications and contracting will begin in May of this year. And then, of course, our anticipated project start date, of course, will start the new fiscal year on July 1.
All right, now to review a bit about the eligibility for projects applying through the CEFA process. Next slide. Okay, so our minimum eligibility guidelines are that any organization applying for funding must be a nonprofit 501c3 tax-exempt organization or another city agency. All organizations must be in good standing with the state of Maryland and be able to provide a certification of good standing as part of the application. You'll also need to submit 2 years, your most recent 2 years of financial reports in accordance with 2 CFR Part 200. For those projects that are applying as renewal projects, your agency will need to be a continuum of care member. And new applicants will need to become a continuum of care member should they receive funding. Note, organizations must have an active SAM registration and a valid DUNS number, and projects must be able to start July 1st, 2022. Note that all grant terms will be 1 year from July 1st, 2022, June 30th of 2023. And all projects are eligible to apply for renewals annually, but no funding in particular is guaranteed for renewal. Next slide. As part of the application process, we will be looking towards financial health and compliance, in particular for renewal projects. Note, we'll review your audits and your accountant prepared financial statements, primarily to find, to review any findings or material weaknesses, to look at cash flow and other sources of funding or support for your organization, and review access to lines of credit. For renewal projects, note that we will also be looking to a history of deobligation of funding, to timely invoicing and the accuracy of submissions, and to any monitoring findings that have occurred during the course of the project. Next slide. The City of Baltimore also has a number of insurance coverage requirements in order for us to be able to contract with nonprofit organizations. Note that all applicants must currently carry or be willing to obtain the following insurance coverage, namely professional liability, error and omission insurance for a minimum $3 million in coverage, workers' compensation coverage, general commercial liability insurance for a minimum of $3 million, business automobile liability insurance for a minimum of $1 million, as well as fidelity coverage and cyber liability insurance for a minimum of $1 million. As a note, all agencies are required to purchase this coverage and submit proof of coverage prior to receiving their final contract with the city. All projects must also commit to being housing first. For anyone not familiar, note that housing first is really the principle that homelessness is first and foremost a housing problem and should be treated as such. Housing is a right to which all are entitled. Note that issues that may have contributed to a household's homelessness can be best addressed once they are housed. This principle, again, really follows the idea that people who are homeless or on the verge of homelessness should be returned to or stabilized in permanent housing as quickly as possible without any prerequisites or conditions of treatment acceptance or compliance for issues such as mental health and or substance abuse. Lastly, the service provider working with the individual should attempt to connect the client to robust resources necessary to sustain their housing, and that participation in support services is achieved through assertive engagement and not coercion. So a little more on housing first. As we mentioned, the programs must all focus on quickly moving residents to permanent housing. Note that programs may not screen out clients for issues such as having too little or no income at the time of enrollment, having active issue or history of substance use, having a criminal record, or a history of domestic violence, for example, a lack of protective order, requiring a certain minimum period of separation from their abuser, or a history of past involvement with law enforcement. Also notably, the program may not terminate clients for things such as a failure to participate in supportive services, for a failure to make progress on a particular service plan, for any loss of income or failure to improve their income, or for being a victim of domestic violence. All projects will also be required to comply with fair housing requirements. This is in line with the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which was drafted to ensure equal access to housing and guarantee equal opportunity without regard to race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, including children under the age of 18 living with their parents or legal custodian, pregnant women, or people securing custody of children under the age of 18, or any perceived or actual disability. The City of Baltimore also has additional requirements around fair housing. It ensures that there's a protected class status in place for race, color, religion, national origin, ancestry, sex, marital status, physical or mental disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Okay, a bit about faith-based services. Note that as a condition of receiving CFA funding, organizations must agree that the organization will not discriminate against any employee or applicant for employment on the basis of religion and will not limit employment or give preference employment on the basis of religion, that the organization will not discriminate against, limit services provided to, or give preference to any person obtaining shelter or other services offered by the project or any other eligible activity permissible under the CFA program on the basis of religion, and will not limit such service provision or give preference to persons on the basis of religion. Lastly, organization must not require clients to participate in religious instruction, counseling, religious services, worship, not including voluntary non-denominational prayer before meetings, or engage in religious proselytizing or exert other religious influences in the provision of shelter or other activities. As we mentioned earlier, participation in the city's coordinated access system is also a requirement of these projects. So coordinated access really refers to our centralized system of intake and referral to permanent housing programs. So there is a centralized, standardized assessment, referral, and prioritization process for housing and services. This coordinated access system matches clients to permanent housing programs that include rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing projects. Note that drop-in centers, shelters, transitional housing, and street outreach projects must designate key staff to serve as navigators for coordinated access, and programs will be monitored for coordinated access participation, and performance measures will be utilized in future funding competitions. Note that all permanent housing programs, both permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, must receive all referrals through the coordinated access. We have a similar system referred to as coordinated entry as it refers to shelter. Note that coordinated entry is a centralized and standardized front door system to emergency and temporary shelter here in the city. The qualities of an effective coordinated access process mean that they must be low barrier, housing first oriented, person-centered, to provide fair and equal access to all persons seeking services, as well as standardized access, inclusive services, could make referrals to coordinated access for permanent housing, to utilize our HMIS system, and to have full coverage in our continuum of care. Note that Baltimore City uses a coordinated entry hotline as its primary access point, as you can see the number noted on the slide. Okay, last point here is a little bit about why we use our coordinated system. In the past, without this coordinated system, what is essentially required is you have one navigator who is then applying on behalf of clients to potentially dozens of housing programs. With a coordinated system, it reduces the amount of paperwork and follow-up required simply because clients complete a single standardized set of paperwork and then are matched to the housing resources that best meet their needs as they become available. Next slide. So I mentioned HMIS a little bit earlier. Note that HMIS stands for the Homeless Management Information System, which is a centralized database used across the city. MOHS is the designated lead agency for the HMIS system in our continuum of care. So we operate this database on behalf of Baltimore City as a jurisdiction. The database is operated through ClientTrack, that's the software platform we use in accordance with federal regulations, and that any and all grantees must enter their client data into this homeless management information system, and that data quality and performance is managed through the database.
Thanks, Katie. So I will be talking a little bit more about this CIFA project. So what are eligible project activities? Who can you serve? We'll go into a little bit of detail about the HOPWA and state special funds, and then COC policies.
Karma, you might be on mute.
Yep, I just realized that. So let me go back. I apologize for that. I will be talking a little bit more about the CIFA project, so eligible project activities, who we can serve, and some details about the HOPWA SSF and the COC policies. Project activities under the CIFA follow the following slides. So new projects can apply for rapid rehousing, street outreach, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, housing and services for people living with HIV or AIDS. Renewal projects can consist of all of the above listed in new projects, but also renewals can apply for case management for PSH and then transitional housing. So just to note, there are no new projects accepted for case management for PSH and for transitional housing. So I'll go into a little bit of detail about each of the project activities. However, just note that there's more detailed information that's found in the RFP with links to the specific regulations. So with rapid rehousing, primarily this is funded through our Emergency Solutions Grant and Homelessness Solutions Program. It's time-limited rental assistance and financial supports with targeted supports. The goals are to help individuals and families obtain housing quickly, increase self-sufficiency, and maintain housing. And as Katie mentioned earlier, you must follow housing first principles outlined in the application. So housing is offered without any preconditions to employment, income, and an absence of criminal record or sobriety. Rapid rehousing and housing stabilization are two projects that have specific housing outcomes. And so this is definitely aligned with the priorities of the CIFA and the COC's action plans, which are to, again, connect participants to permanent housing. Note that housing is not only the only aspect of this project proposal. Projects should have a strong approach to connecting their participants to support services. However, they cannot mandate the requirement to participate in those support services, but they must be offered. Since these activities are time limited, it's important to have a strong case management and support services connected to the project to ensure that as the financial assistance ends, your participants can still successfully maintain housing on their own. So some additional key components to this, and these are things that we would be looking at in project proposals, are housing identification, rental and financial assistance, and then support services. So how a project is going to ensure that they are able to find and designate housing for their program participants. So looking at how to recruit landlords willing to participate in that program, how they will manage to manage the financial assistance component. So how long rental assistance will be, their participants will be eligible for, moving costs, rental application fees, security deposits, utility deposits and utility payments. Those are all included as pieces of the financial assistance, and really looking to see projects using a progressive engagement model to determine the length and amount of rental assistance for each household. And again, so these can be, they may be unique per household, but there should be a process on how that's determined. And then again, the support services that are not limited to housing stability, case management, mediation, legal services, and credit repair. Again, part of this is described within the RFP, but note that selected projects will need to coordinate with MOHS about the standardized policies and practices with rapid rehousing. So similar to rapid rehousing, we have home housing stabilization and prevention. Again, this project is also funded under Emergency Solutions Grant and Homelessness Solutions Program. It is, again, time-limited rental and financial assistance, but it's very specific to target households that are to prevent them from moving into an emergency shelter or another place described in the paragraph 1 of the homeless definition. So the real goal here is to help individuals and families regain stability in their current housing, or if that's not possible, find permanent housing by connecting to other services and support. There are some restrictions on who is eligible for housing stabilization prevention, and really, again, they will need to meet that criteria under at risk of homelessness status, and then the lack of resources to obtain permanent housing and have an annual income that does not exceed 30% of AMI. And again, there's additional details within the RFP with links to the actual regulations. Part of some of the key components that we're looking for in project proposals are an agency's approach to the assessment and the rental and financial assistance that's provided. So again, with the assessment, really ensuring that at enrollment, a household is evaluated to avoid their homelessness situation with limited assistance, and then also really focusing on navigating any barriers and building a support system within their community. And then within the rental and financial assistance, in case of any outstanding arrears, projects should work with other local rent relief programs to support households, but then also may provide short and medium-term rental assistance or one-time rental arrears to, again, prevent the household from, which, I'm sorry, that's a mistype there, but preventing a household from returning to homelessness or becoming homeless. Outreach is another project activity under the CFA. So outreach projects are funded again through Emergency Solutions Grant and the Homelessness Solutions Program. There's an array of different eligible costs under outreach projects. However, proposals should focus on the costs of activities to locate, identify, and build relationships with unsheltered people and engage them with the purpose of providing immediate support, interventions, and connections with the homeless assistance programs and or any mainstream social services and housing programs. So again, those are things that we're looking for within the project proposals. Some of the key components here, again, we want to see the service area focusing on the full Baltimore City, but you may have a focus on a subsection of the city, what engagements you're using, any specialized services, and then your ability to partner with the larger homeless services system and other outreach teams. Emergency shelter, again, another component of the CEFA. It's funded under Emergency Solutions Grant, the Homelessness Solutions Program, and the Department of Social Services grant. So there's 3 different funding sources. It's important to note that many of the shelter projects under the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services are funded through general funds. However, those are not awarded through the Consolidated Funding Application. The purpose of using ESG, HSP, and DSS is to support overnight shelters and provide daytime programming that are cost effective and are that have proposed performance outcomes that are focused on rehousing. So again, there's different eligible items that you can put into your budget for emergency shelters, such as shelter operations for overnight and day shelters, essential services that include staff and programming, food, transportation. There are eligible costs under vouchers for motels and hotels, but please note that there's some fairly detailed documentation that's required to use for that to be an eligible expense, and we'll need to be able to determine that the reason for a voucher would be that there's no emergency shelter available. Some key components of the emergency shelter, again, they're required to use and participate in the coordinated entry hotline, which is connecting, as Katie mentioned, the emergency shelter hotline that we have. Projects must be low barrier to entry, and projects must focus on exiting participants to permanent housing. So although it is a shelter project, we want these projects to also be thinking about next steps and how to move participants in temporary shelter into permanent housing. You must be able to navigate clients in the coordinated access system and support clients in obtaining necessary documentation. It is just important to note that any shelter that accepts children is considered a family shelter and therefore must accept all family compositions regardless of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or age of any member of the family. And then in accordance to the COMAR Title V, Subtitle 21, shelters are prohibited from involuntarily separating families. So if there are any questions about that, please feel free to put that in the chat. And then project will need to coordinate with MOHS to develop standard policies and procedures that align with the emergency and temporary shelters that are already exist in our system. So I'm going to pass it over to Deandra. She's going to talk a little bit more about the details of the programming under housing and services for people living with HIV or AIDS.
So housing and services for people living with HIV or AIDS projects are funded under the Housing Opportunities for Persons with HIV/AIDS, or HOPWA, and state special funds. HOPWA, all funded projects must be aligned with the National HIV/AIDS strategy. And for the state special funds, it's issued by the Maryland Department of Health and in partnership with the Baltimore City Health Department. So of course, these funds are funds used for as a last resort. So you would apply these funds once you've exhausted all other possibilities. Projects should reflect the National HIV/AIDS strategy. 1, reduce new HIV infections, and 2, increase access to care and improve health outcomes. 3, reduce HIV-related disparities and health inequities. And 4, achieve a more coordinated national response to the HIV epidemic. The key components to these types of services, short-term rent, mortgage, and utility assistance. These could be like one-time only services, or for if under this particular funding for HOPWA, you can utilize this assistance up to 52 weeks in a year. Support services, case management, transportation assistance, food assistance, employment development, mental health services, and substance abuse services, all would fall under support services for both of these grants. Permanent housing placement, security deposits, first month's rent, utility deposits, and moving costs. Now, your permanent housing placement dollars, of course, some of these activities do not apply under your state special funds. Security deposits, for instance, would not, but with your HOPWA grant, you could apply specific things, of course, and when you submit your proposal, we would give you some direction on which grant this would apply under.
Okay, now going over the CFA review and selection process. This will be fairly quick, I believe, but we'll talk through the submission requirements, budget templates, proposal review, and then the scoring criteria, and some a little bit more detail about system performance. So with the submission requirements, we only accept paper. I'm sorry, we do not accept any paper or fax applications. All applications must be submitted electronically. So just let me clarify that. All applications must be submitted to the HSP applications inbox that's listed here, and it's listed multiple times on the RFP. The application cover sheet and narrative should be in a PDF format, and then the project budget should remain in an Excel format. Renewal projects should utilize the budget template that corresponds with their current funding source, and then new projects should use the project budget template that matches their project type. So you'll know that on the website, on the competition page, there are multiple different budget templates. So there is one for emergency shelter, street outreach, homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing, and then housing individuals living with HIV or AIDS. So again, if you're applying for one of those projects, use the correct budget template. If you have questions on that, that's a good, thing to follow up with us using that HSP applications inbox. When you're submitting the documents, we really do ask that you use a clear naming convention. You're not required to use the one listed here, but that's just an example. We understand that the full application package can be large, and so it might not fit in one email. And so if you're submitting it in multiple emails, we do want to make sure we understand what project it's going towards, especially if you're an agency that's applying for more than one project. It's really helpful for us to know that this goes to this project and so on. So again, we encourage you to use a really clear naming convention, and you can copy this one here. And then also, we do recommend if it's possible, to submit your applications in a zip file so it all comes together in one email, but that's not required. If you have questions or have challenges with submission, again, feel free to reach out to us. We do encourage you to submit your application before the deadline, just in case you have any issues with getting the application to us. So the budget templates that I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So there's definitely on the competition page, you'll see there's multiple different budget templates. Just note that the emergency shelter template can be used for multiple projects. So drop-in day centers and transitional housing projects should use this budget template. There's not a separate one for those specific projects because those are all funded under the emergency shelter umbrella. We didn't talk a lot about permanent supportive housing earlier, but there is a specific case management permanent supportive housing budget template. Again, that's only eligible for those renewal projects. And again, in the budget narrative, we want to see clear descriptions of each proposed eligible expense. Please detail any projected personnel costs, staff roles, and qualifications within that budget narrative as well. So be as clear and detailed as possible. Again, this is evaluated with your narrative when we're reviewing the projects. So the proposal review, there's a 3-step process in reviewing the consolidated funding applications. The first 2 are to evaluate whether your project moves through our threshold review. And so step 1 is really the application completeness. So whether it was timely and whether it was thorough. So, projects need to be submitted by that deadline of Monday, March 14th at 4 p.m. All required documents and attachments must be received. We'll do an initial review of that project. If it's missing an attachment, the agency will be notified and allowed to submit information within a given time frame. So if as we're reviewing the projects, just as an example, if you're missing a document such as the signed Housing First agreement, we may reach out to you and let you know this was missing and it's required that it's signed to pass the threshold. We'll give you a time frame on when to return that. And again, it may affect your overall score with your quality of your proposal. However, we'll give you some time to submit that information if it's missing. However, what we will not do, if you're missing full-on sections of your narrative or your budget, pieces of your application that that may be revised within that time frame, we will not permit applicants to submit any revised materials. So if you're missing pieces of your narrative or you've missed sections of your budget, unfortunately we can't extend that deadline. So again, we really encourage folks to submit early, and if you have questions on sections on whether you need to fill this out or not, feel free to again reach out to us specifically about that. The second step of eligibility review is whether the project meets the proposed eligible activities in accordance to each of the funding sources. So if your agency proposes a project that's ineligible, or the costs are ineligible, or there's not a match there, you won't pass threshold review, mainly because, even if it's a great proposal, we don't have a funding source to fund that project. We'll also be looking at the financial health and risk assessment. So again, reviewing the last 2 years of your financial health statements. So again, if your projects pass step 1 and step 2, they will go to project scoring and be evaluated by a larger review panel. The panel is they consist of both COC stakeholders that include people with lived experience, and then MOHS staff. And then again, within those COC stakeholders, those are individuals or people that represent agencies that are not seeking funding or receiving funding. So if you're an agency that's, again, receiving any funding or seeking funding, you're not eligible to participate in that review panel. Project scoring. So we have 2 different categories for project scoring, and there's some details about the weight of each section within the RFP. It's not listed here, but again, if you have specific questions, we can go over that. But category 1 is for all new projects. So the need of the project, your approach, and what your proposed performance objectives are. There's a whole section on SMART goals, and so we'll really look at that to see what you're proposing. Your organizational capacity to take on these funds, if awarded, your ability to collaborate or what you've done already as an agency to collaborate, and then again, the overall quality of the proposal. So, did it make sense? Was everything submitted within the application? Did we get it on time? Those things. And then for, this should say category 2, sorry, and it should say all renewal projects. I apologize, I'll correct that when it gets posted to the website, is for, again, the first 5 areas are repeated need, approach, organizational capacity, collaboration, and then the overall quality of the proposal. But then again, renewal projects, because they've had they've received funds in the past, we'll also be looking at their project compliance and their performance outcomes for the past year. Again, sorry, this should say category 2 on the right-hand side. So what we're looking at for renewal projects in terms of compliance and system performance, projects are going to be evaluated with about their HMIS participation, their participation within the coordinated access and entry system, if applicable, their monitoring results as a project. So have they been meeting the program regulations and meeting the fair housing and equal access laws, fiscal reporting and timeliness, and then the project performance based on each individual project type. So really, are you meeting your proposed scope that you had proposed in your original project, and are you fully utilizing the project as well? So are you spending down those dollars at the end of the year and at capacity? Any project that has significant underspending in city fiscal 21 and that we have projected any underspending in city fiscal year 22 may see a reduction in their award regardless of their overall proposal score. So again, if you're a renewal project that has, again, not spent down the city fiscal year 21 award, and then you're behind schedule in city fiscal year 22, and we don't have, much more information about why there has been significant underspending, there's a chance that your project may be reduced, again, regardless of that overall proposal score. So again, with renewal projects, there is a section within the application that asks about your projected spending. So just make sure you indicate if there are if for some reason we haven't seen a spend down, that you note that in that part of the application. So with that, we're going to mute the webinar, and then we'll look to see if there are any questions, and if there are, we'll try to answer them within the webinar time frame, and then if not, we'll close out, and again, we'll make a couple corrections to the slides, and then post them on the website and post that FAQ up there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and mute, and then we'll pause for a few minutes to collect questions. So yeah, we're on mute right now. It doesn't look like there were any questions. I apologize for, looks like my audio had cut for a minute, but hopefully if we were able to capture everything with the presentation. The full recording will be posted on the website later today, along with the slides. We really do encourage folks to reach out to us with individual questions about your projects. We'll do our best to answer them. Just know, because it's a competitive competition, we are limited to what we can share. Any question that we answer individually, we typically will post on with the full FAQ on the competition page. With that, there's just a list of resources here again that are linked. You'll be able to access them once these slides get posted. They're all also within the RFP document. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you from the MOHS team, and we look forward to getting a bunch of great proposals this year. Good luck, and have a great day.